Welcome to Tokyo Talk. I'm your host, Patrick McEachran, coming to you from the studio at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. I'm pleased to be joined today by my old friend and colleague, Shihoko Goto, the Director for Geoeconomics and Indo-Pacific Enterprise and Deputy Director of the Asia Program at the Wilson Center. Welcome.
It's so nice to be here, Patrick.
I really appreciate your taking the time. So you're working on this exciting new project, right? So This is on economic security and cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. So let me ask you first, what is economic security?
Yeah, so economic security has become this big buzzword. And it is an effort to really confront the China challenge. According to foreign policy analysts and defense analysts, we have this China challenge that we're trying to push back against Chinese economic coercion, the violation of the rule of law, threats that the Chinese malpractice pose to economic growth and stability. Are there ways for countries to work together? Are there ways for governments to coordinate within their own countries to push back against this threat? But what we also have to do is step back and think about how economic security is perceived in other parts of the world. So economic security in a lot of emerging markets and developing countries, especially the global south, is similar to food security, that there are challenges to growth, there are challenges to opportunities and prosperity, and what can they do to ensure that they continue to grow. So economic security, although it's bandied about a lot, it can actually mean a lot to a lot of different countries and be perceived in different ways. So this is actually a challenge that we're already facing from the get-go.
Right. So economic security then but for the United States and Japan, or for the advanced economies in North Asia, fair to say a very different challenge than what we find in the rest of the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is that until quite recently, U.S. and Japan relations, one of the biggest thorns on the side of the bilateral relation had been trade tensions, right? And so a lot of dispute about tariffs and market access. That had been this kind of really big hurdle in ensuring that there was robust relations between Tokyo and Washington. Now we are seeing that the two countries actually share economic challenges. And so economic considerations are actually bringing the two countries closer together. And it's interesting because they're also not only sharing the similar challenges, but they're also very much on an equal footing. There are a lot of uncertainties about growth, about the rule of law, about how are countries actually going to be able to move forward amid all of these geopolitical risks, and how is that going to hamper their growth. So these concerns are actually bringing Japan and the United States closer together.
So the United States and Japan share a goal with respect to economic security. Does that mean that, based upon you've had a variety of meetings over the last few days here in Tokyo, is it your sense that the two countries share the same approach to dealing with the problem?
So we're very grateful to the State Department for allowing us to have this grant to spend a year really not only defining what economic security is, whether there are differences between the two countries on how to frame the challenges, and then finally talking about steps to move forward. And I believe that there are many similarities. There are common threats that the two countries know that they need to work together on. But at the same time, at this stage, right now, we find that economic security considerations are very much domestic issues. So not only are we facing this China challenge, we've also had COVID and the disruptions that come from a global pandemic. And so we're talking about resilience, being able to withstand some of the unexpected shocks to the system. But that means that each country really needs to focus on, well, how do you withstand those shocks? And a lot of the discussion has been about, well, can we actually become much more, self-sufficient, decrease dependence not just on countries that are seen as, hostile to one's own country, but also become, have vertical integration and ensure that there is independence and economic trajectory. So that is one of the issues that's coming into consideration. Another buzzword that we're also talking about is supply chains, right? And supply chain resilience is an issue that both Japan and the United States face too. We've seen with the pandemic that access to critical supplies have been disrupted either deliberately or because of closing down of ports to deal with this pandemic, and also an inability, a realization that some of the most critical products were actually not made within one's own country, and so there needed to be this dependence on imports. And so the challenge is going to be being able to access critical supplies more quickly within one's borders. But at the same time, we also have to be cost effective as well. So there are many challenges. The first order is going to be about each country, the United States and Japan respectively, coming up with a roadmap about how they're going to be able to do that within their own borders, and then realizing that in order to be, if not self-sufficient, at least self-sufficient and economically competitive, that's going to be very difficult in industrialized countries because costs are so expensive.
Right.
And so you need to find friends and partners that you can depend on. So it's trying to come up with networks to work together, to collaborate together, but it really does have to be based on trust.
So those networked, trustworthy countries, rules respecting countries seem to be more in the high income bracket. And to your point about costs, what sort of countries could be brought into this sort of supply chain dynamic that would both respect rules and also be able to bring some lower cost labor to avoid high prices of these products?
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest challenges. And also, we also need to think about not supply chains generically, but it depends on the product as well. And so we talk about clothing and shoes, the supply chain of that. But really, in this case, we're talking about the high technology-driven, more sensitive products that have use both not just in the consumer economy, but also could have like the dual use within the defense sector as well. So semiconductors are certainly one of them. Batteries, high-powered batteries is another. And so these are supply products that require a lot of upfront investment, continued investment. There are countries that really excel in producing them. In the case of semiconductors, it's Taiwan first and foremost of all. And Taiwan, of course, is a trusted partner for both the United States and Japan. And there have been a great deal of effort on the part of Japan as well as the United States to really work together with Taiwan. And Taiwan, too, has been very eager to work with allies to ensure that its capabilities and knowledge are shared with these countries as well.
Is it too simplistic to say that in these high-tech sectors, supply chain resilience is just another word for trying to get China out of the supply chain of those industries?
It is, I think the more successful way, the more constructive way, I should say, of looking at it is to make sure that countries can continue to trust one another and depend on each other and not close out each other to markets. We know that if we do export the highest end of technology technologies to China, there runs the risk of abuse and actual abuse towards other countries. So we want to avoid that. And I think there is a consensus about it. But at the same time, there is concern about making the standards too focused on an individual country so that it is very difficult to cooperate. And I think one of the risks too is this emergence of a tendency towards industrial policy, that you are going to invest in a sector or in a particular company for all sorts of good reasons, you would think, but the medium to longer term consequences of those investments can actually not lead to strong growth. So in the semiconductor sector, yes, we had seen this incredible global shortage, and we saw that we're very dependent on Taiwan. And Taiwan is Taiwan is very vulnerable, not just to Chinese coercion, but it is also isolated. It's an island. It is also prone to natural disasters as well. So it does make sense to not simply rely on semiconductors that come from Taiwan, but to diversify that supply as well. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we continue to work together so that the products are compatible with each other. And so there are these goals of ensuring compatibility and offsetting some of the geopolitical risks as well.
That's really interesting. Now, one of the aspects of your research project, if I understand correctly, is looking at the specific industries, critical industries in particular,
right?
And rulemaking in that regard,
right?
First of all, what are critical industries? Did the U.S. and Japan, do we agree on which industries are deemed critical? Yeah.
So for the United States, the big ones are in semiconductors, high capacity batteries, pharmaceuticals, and critical rare earths, right? Japan shares that too, but for Japan, I would actually add energy. America is a big energy exporter, but Japan is not. And I would also add that human capacity, workforce is also another issue that we're not really talking about. Neither side is really talking about it at this stage, but those are some of the issues that we really need to put in the forefront as well.
And so if you're talking about rulemaking with respect to critical industries across either two countries or across many countries, how does one go about setting rules? Is that simply a trade deal?
No. I think trying to make a trade deal, because at the end of the day, a trade deal is about market access and ensuring that there is investment opportunities and the like. This is really about harmonization and standardization of rules, so that if a Japanese company wants to invest in the United States and continue to work with a defense company in the United States that supplies machinery to the Pentagon, then the Japanese companies are able to do that. And so that Japan has the security clearance mechanisms that will ensure that it meets the standards and the needs of the United States. And that we know that the United States and Japan have a very strong relationship. But at the corporate level, too, there is this clarity about how trustworthy they can be, and that there is this uniformity in being able to meet those security criterions.
Let's move maybe a little bit further south to some of the partner countries in the Indo-Pacific. And the United States has been trying to build up the economic resiliency of a variety of partners, especially vis-a-vis Chinese predatory lending, things of this nature. How do you see as the best way to try to go about that? specifically if, for example, if the Chinese are able to capture elites, especially in sort of non-democratic or low democracy sort of countries. How can the U.S. and Japan sort of work together to try to counteract that threat?
Yeah, so that's a really big challenge, I think. There is a lot of concern in Southeast Asia about U.S. rhetoric about working together with Southeast Asian countries being robust, but those words not actually being followed up with actionable, financial mechanisms or the kind of support that they would need. Of course, in the case of Japan has still remains the single biggest investor, provider of financing to Southeast Asia, but China over the last few years has really ratcheted up that kind of investment. And although Japan still remains the highest provider of financial investment to Southeast Asia, China is catching up really rapidly. We want to make sure that the Southeast Asian countries continue to work together and want to partner with both Japan and the United States. So where do they need the money the most? It's really in a lot of the big infrastructure projects. They also need to be able to move up. We talk about supply chains, but we want to go up that value chain, right? And to be able to provide the kind of support so that they can move up and so that they can actually be part of the network that both the United States and Japan would tap into. That requires not just money, it also requires a lot of input in ensuring that the people power, the workforce is actually there as well. It also means that it's not just about assembly lines and doing the final product, but also being part of the research efforts as well. So it really is a rethinking and overhaul of relations between Southeast Asia and Japan and the United States. I actually think that this is a really good opportunity to reconsider how aid effectiveness and development assistance can be, and it's not just about pushing back against Chinese economic coercion, but it really is about what are some of the shared goals, what are the common values in ensuring that there is continued investment in the region.
This is really a fascinating project that you're embarking on, and I'm amazed that you're at the beginning of it still. So you'll get an opportunity to do more research, including more trips here to Japan over the course of the year, and we can look forward to a report sometime next August. Is that right?
Yes.
So we'll be able to find that on the Wilson Center webpage next August.
Yes.
Wonderful. We look forward to seeing it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.